Well, friends, we're back with some Star Trek news, but before we get into that, apologies for the lack of content lately. My throat's been a mess the last week or so. Hopefully it holds out throughout this video. That remains to be seen, but we're coming to TrekMovie.com for some William Shatner today. It's been reported a multitude of other places, but let's stick to this for now. And before we get to that, Valeris, they want us to take a trip to Valeris. Wasn't she a traitor? I don't think I'll be going there. Anyway, I digress. I'm just going to paraphrase a lot of this, not read the entire thing. But William Shatner is hinting at one more return to Star Trek as James T. Kirk. Why not James R. Kirk? Probably because Lower Decks has been canceled. They would have done that, but I digress once again. The idea of William Shatner returning to the role of James T. Kirk has been a hot topic, not Spencer's hot topic, since his version of the character was killed off in the 1994 film Star Trek Generations. There have been a variety of attempts to bring the character back, but none have panned out. I shall assume they're going to touch on some of these later in the article, so I'm not just going to wildly speculate right now. But basically, the gist of this is that Shatner himself is expecting a new pitch. This coming from the Vancouver, British Columbia Fan Expo Vancouver that's been going on. A staff member, Jennifer McDonough, from the Direct, had a panel, or is reporting from the panel, that he has been contacted by a writer on one of Paramount's currently in development Star Trek series, and he is quoted as saying, "I have been asked to come back as Kirk so many times. If Kirk is going to come back, it has to mean something. It has to be the show. But I was so impressed by the writers, so I said, let's talk after I'm done in Vancouver. So I'm awaiting a pitch to make the show. It should come on Monday or Tuesday. So as we are currently sitting here, there is potential that the Shat is getting a potential story idea for his return as Kirk in some way, shape, or fashion, manner, however you want to go about that. What show could fit? Well, if we think about it, and I probably should just go ahead and read this, but what shows do we have left right now? We have Strange New Worlds, and we have Academy. We probably don't have Prodigy. Theoretically, who's to say right now? We have no confirmation of a legacy right now, so I can't imagine there's any writer currently focusing on that. And we've got no Lower Decks, so we really only have Strange New World, which is pretty much already done with the upcoming season, so it would be a couple of years down the line for that. An Academy. And they're going to go into this, but basically, I have my own thoughts here. Starfleet Academy is set in the far future, as seen in Discovery in the 32nd century. It could avoid the time travel scenario altogether. An older and wiser Kirk could be a holographic training teaching simulation, or even a D.H. Shatner to look more like Kirk in the movie era is on the table. I have a lot of thoughts on that. I am very much anticipating and expecting that to be a huge scenario that plays out throughout Academy. I would be shocked if they don't bring in all sorts of older Star Trek actors to reprise their roles as holographic instructors. Yes, that's a little bit cheating. Yes, that's not necessarily the way I would like to see a lot of the characters return, but it just makes sense to have a class taught by, let's just say, I don't know, a combat scenario by William T. Riker or something like that. If that's the way they're going to get Shatner in this, I don't necessarily think that meets with his criteria of it has to really make sense for the storyline. I feel like that's more of a glorified cameo and less of a triumphant return of James T. Kirk played by Shatner to the franchise. So I don't necessarily think that's the type of thing he would do to just kind of sit there and teach a class as not real hologram Kirk. There's also the tantalizing tease from Picard Season 3 of Kirk's remains being kept at the Daystrom Station, the Project Phoenix. Now, while we don't have a confirmation of a legacy show or anything like that, I suppose Phoenix could have been kept around, he could have been revived in the 32nd century, whatever. I don't necessarily think this is a good option either, but the reason I would say that might have a little bit more potential to actually be what's on the table is because Project Phoenix is sort of kind of in a nod or an homage or a play on the Shatnerverse novels when he brought himself back to life. I guess technically he didn't bring himself back to life. He revived and resurrected the character of James T. Kirk in the novels that he kind of co-wrote. I know his name's on it. Those were his babies. Those were a Star Trek alternate universe where Kirk was kind of sort of maybe the most important person in the universe. So I could see him wanting to come back to the series in something that's in essence the fan fiction he wrote about himself. Oh, we also have the Tawny Newsome in the Simian comedy show I forgot to mention. I don't think that's necessarily as set in stone as it's seemingly being reported. However, I definitely think it's probably going to happen. I just don't know how far along it is to have a writer attached who would be reaching out right now to tell William Shatner, we're going to get you back on the show. We want to bring you in for a pitch. I feel like that one is more outside the realm of possibility. However, if it was Tawny Newsome coming to him about this, maybe that does have a little more credence. But let's go back here because Shatner has been approached before. It was rumored that Roberto Orci had a role for him in the unproduced third Kelvin timeline film. So Star Trek Beyond, the one that actually does exist? I think that means the fourth. A scene was written for him but never officially pitched in Star Trek 2009. His image was shown. As you can see here, he did recently pop up in the Otoy thing, so, you know, it's not technically part of the main Star Trek universe, but it's so close that it's basically like he reprised the role even though he wasn't necessarily the one always on stage. It was made with his permission, his likeness. He was there for a little bit of it, so it could conceivably be considered his final appearance in Star Trek up to this point. This really leaves us with the question, do we want a William Shatner appearance to take place in any current iteration of Star Trek? We know we only have a limited time with him left. We only have a limited time with George Takei and Walter Koenig. I guess those are those the only three we have left right now? Guess so. And we just had two of them in the current iteration of shows. George was in the very short Treks, and then we had him also in Lower Decks, and we had technically not Pavel, but another Anton Chekhov, I think was his name, the president of the Federation in Picard Season 3. So they've made a reappearance in the current iteration of Star Trek. Is this something we want to see, having the man himself come back to Star Trek? Yes, we have Chris Pine. Yes, we have, and why can't I think of his name? Wesley. Paul Wesley? Is that his name? Playing Shatner. No, not playing Shatner. Playing Kirk in the Strange New Worlds era. So we do have current versions of Kirk, but do we want the original? Regardless of how you feel about William Shatner, this is possibly the last chance we would ever actually get to see him in the Star Trek universe. Is that something that you want to see? Is that something we need to happen? Or did he kind of go out on top in Generations? I can't imagine many people feel that way, but there might be some people out there that thought it was a good fitting ending for him. Or do you think what they did with Otoy was a good way to close the chapter on that? Is there a way you would bring him back? I know the possibilities really are endless. They could do some of the things mentioned here. Time travel, holographic version of him, an alternate timeline. I know they had plans to bring him back in Star Trek Enterprise, but not as Prime Kirk. He was going to be Mirror Kirk after being the deposed tyrant. He was shot through the Tantalus field, and he ended up in the Prime universe, but in the past where he was being kept in a prison colony. That would have been interesting. I don't know. That could still be the story they use. There's no reason they couldn't just kind of change that story around and have him be sent to the future of the Prime universe to be in a prison camp instead of the past of the Prime universe. I'm not sold on wanting that story to begin with. He could just be a training hologram or something on Star Trek Academy. Again, I don't feel like that's a world-saving type of reason to bring him back. That seems more like a glorified cameo just to have Shatner when there's no reason to bring him in to actually have him fit into the story. Now, if they were going to take that and run with it, kind of similar to, I think it's a final episode of Babylon 5 where they keep jumping into various versions in the future to kind of show how the myth grew throughout history, or I guess future history of the universe. If something like that happened where that one sequence where all of the characters were recreated as holograms, they didn't like the way society was being run, so their holographic programs kind of took on the personalities of the people they were based upon to come together and save the universe one more time. I could see something similar to that happening. They bring back Shatner as James T. Kirk as a training hologram in Academy. He isn't necessarily gelling with the way things currently are being run. He develops sentience, thinks that he's the original Kirk, or at least takes on all the traits of the original Kirk, and goes on one final grand heroic mission to save the soul of the Federation or something. Again, not a perfect solution, but these are ways they could bring him back. Or they could just go a wacky time travel route. Somebody goes back in time, changes history so Kirk didn't die. Or one of my ideas was if they were ever going to do an actual Kelvin universe Star Trek 4, the Kelvin universe cast would go back in time to the 1980s and kind of Back to the Future 2 themselves into the original Star Trek 4, into the background. that would be kind of a way to get him in, but that's more of a trials and tribulations way to use him, not an actual returning James T. Kirk way. They could also do some sort of thing where all of the Kirks meet, but that's, again, way too fan fiction-y probably. At the end of the day, I think it all comes down to, do we need to see Shatner as Kirk one more time? And is there a meaningful way to bring him into the story where it's justified for a good story and a meaningful final outing for William Shatner as James T. Kirk? Or is he kind of already done his time? Have we moved on? Do we have these new versions of Kirk and we don't need to go backwards? Whatever you think, leave it down below. Do you think he should come back? Do you have a story or a way you would like to see him reintroduced into the show? Or do you think he should just stay where he is and we've seen the last of James T. Kirk by William Shatner? Whatever you think, leave it down below. Like, share, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. Join. But until next time, computer and program.